It began as a name whispered across the darkest corners of the internet, LockBit. To cybersecurity experts, corporations, hospitals, and even government institutions, that name would soon become synonymous with panic, paralysis, and extortion. LockBit wasn't just another faceless hacker group sending out malicious emails in hopes of catching a few unsuspecting victims. At its core, LockBit specialized in a very modern form of extortion ransomware attacks. The principle was simple, yet devastating. By the time global authorities truly began to understand its reach, LockBit had cemented its reputation as the world's most powerful and prolific cybercrime syndicate. No, this was something far more dangerous, an empire. The only way out? Pay a ransom, usually in cryptocurrency, to receive the decryption key. Data would be encrypted instantly, bringing operations to a halt. Screens would flash ominous messages informing users that their files were inaccessible, locked behind a digital wall of encryption. Once inside a victim's computer systems, be it a hospital, a multinational corporation, or a city government, LockBit would unleash its malicious code. Refuse, and the data would either be destroyed or publicly released on LockBit's dark web leak site, exposing sensitive and often legally protected information. What set LockBit apart from other cybercriminal gangs wasn't just its technical prowess, it was its innovation in structure. LockBit didn't rely solely on its internal team to carry out attacks. Instead, it created and refined what would come to be known as the ransomware as a service model. This marked a turning point in the cybercrime world. Just as tech companies offer cloud platforms and APIs to allow others to build on their services, LockBit allowed independent hackers, called affiliates, to use their ransomware tools in exchange for a cut of the profits. These affiliates would breach organizations and deploy LockBit's malware, while LockBit managed the back-end infrastructure, the leak site, the payment portals, the chat negotiations, and even customer service. Suddenly, schools in California, insurance companies in Europe, and manufacturers in Asia were all being hit, their data held hostage by attackers they might never identify. With LockBit's suite of tools, nearly anyone with basic hacking knowledge could launch a sophisticated cyber attack. This democratization of cybercrime lowered the barrier to entry and expanded LockBit's reach globally. The effect was explosive. Cybercriminals who didn't have the resources or expertise to develop their own ransomware could now participate in highly lucrative attacks with relative ease. LockBit offered incentives, tech support, and even analytics. LockBit's innovation didn't stop at technology, it extended into organization and marketing. Affiliates weren't treated like low-level contractors, they were courted like clients. There were surveys asking affiliates what new features they wanted in the next software update. Performance bonuses were rumored. Bug bounty programs were introduced, rewarding those who found flaws in LockBit's software. This was no longer crime in the shadows, this was a full-fledged business. Behind this well-oiled operation was a shadowy figure known only as the LockBit Sup, short for LockBit Support. He, or perhaps they, was both administrator and spokesperson, hacker and CEO. Fluent in both tech jargon and marketing lingo, LockBit Sup was always online, engaging with journalists, taunting authorities, and fine-tuning the enterprise. He used aliases, changed forums, and encrypted his communications. But his presence was unmistakable. While most cybercriminals vanish into the anonymity of the internet, LockBit Sup leaned in, issuing statements and even interviews that made him the public face of the group. He wanted LockBit to be the Apple of ransomware, a leader in design and performance. His persona was carefully curated, part technical genius, part ruthless entrepreneur. He spoke not just of ransoms and code, but of vision. He boasted about how fast their encryption algorithm worked, how user-friendly their decryption process was, and how responsive their negotiation system had become. Under his watch, LockBit rebranded multiple times, each iteration more refined and more dangerous than the last. What unnerved cybersecurity experts wasn't just the volume of LockBit's attacks, but their efficiency. It was one thing to be targeted by hackers, it was another to be victimized by what felt like a tech startup. Others received FAQs on how to purchase cryptocurrency to pay the ransom. It wasn't just about stealing data, it was about controlling the experience. LockBit was never sloppy. Victims were handled with chilling professionalism. Some reported being offered discounts for prompt payment. And LockBit's leadership never lost sight of optics. When other gangs attracted unwanted attention by targeting hospitals or critical infrastructure, LockBit Sang would issue bans. They claimed to have ethics, stating publicly that they wouldn't attack medical facilities or non-profits. Whether this was genuine or simply damage control, it positioned them differently. They weren't just criminals, they were image-conscious criminals trying to run a brand. By 2022, LockBit was considered untouchable. Law enforcement agencies across the globe were chasing phantoms. Despite mounting pressure and a growing list of victims, no one could seem to find the servers, identify the developers, or pierce the armor of LockBit's SAP. The syndicate had created a business model too decentralized and too fast-moving to stop. Like a hydra, it grew stronger with every attack, every affiliate, and every dollar paid in ransom. And still, at the helm of this silent empire, was a figure more CEO than Kingpin. A man or a collective who understood that in the modern age, crime didn't need to look like back-alley deals or black masks. It could wear the face of innovation. It could scale. It could even offer a refund policy. This was LockBit, not just the most powerful cybercrime gang in the world, the most organized, the most professional, and perhaps most terrifying of all, the most ambitious. Armed with a keyboard, patience, and nerves of steel, he slipped into the inner sanctum of the most dangerous ransomware gang in the world, LockBit. But in the invisible war waged across computer screens and encrypted networks, John Daggio became one of the most critical undercover operatives in modern cybercrime history. He wasn't a spy in the traditional sense. No tuxedo, no gadgets, no cryptic dead drops. Daggio wasn't a law enforcement officer or an intelligence agent. He was a cybersecurity analyst who had spent years studying criminal networks. He created false personas, crafted believable backstories, and embedded himself into the core of the LockBit operation. But where others watched from a distance, relying on logs, signatures, and malware samples, Daggio did something few dared. He went inside. The plan was deceptively simple: pose as a potential affiliate. LockBit's entire business model relied on a wide network of attackers using their tools to launch ransomware campaigns. These affiliates weren't screened like employees, they were customers. If you sounded credible and showed some technical competence, LockBit would give you access to their ransomware payloads and dashboards. Daggio played the part well. Once in, Daggio gained unprecedented access. He was in the chat rooms, reading real-time conversations between LockBit's leadership and its foot soldiers. He monitored live negotiations with victims. He saw how affiliates were trained, what tactics were encouraged, and how payments were processed. He watched as victims begged for time or mercy, and as LockBit's up, ever businesslike, replied with cold, calculated deadlines. These weren't just random attacks, they were targeted, organized, and ruthlessly efficient. Through his infiltration, Daggio provided authorities and security researchers with early warnings. He saw attacks being planned days before they were launched. He identified targets including schools, city councils, and private businesses. In some cases, the intel allowed defenders to patch vulnerabilities just in time. In others, it at least gave responders a head start. But perhaps even more valuable than prevention was the insight his access offered. For the first time, the world could see how LockBit functioned from the inside, not as a theory, but as a living, breathing operation. Daggio's role was like walking a tightrope in a hurricane. Every message had to be carefully written, every conversation delicately balanced. One misstep, one phrase that sounded too law-abiding, one question that probed too deeply, and his cover would be blown. These were not amateurs. LockBit had dealt with spies and frauds before. If they suspected him, it wouldn't just be the end of his operation. It could have dangerous real-world consequences. The emotional weight was crushing. Day after day, Daggio read messages from victims whose lives had been upended. Hospitals that couldn't access patient records. Small businesses on the brink of collapse. Parents unsure if their children's school would be able to reopen. And he had to pretend to be one of the people causing that pain. He had to mimic the cold detachment of the real affiliates, joke about ransom amounts, and ask technical questions about payload deployment, all while trying to gather intel that might save someone down the line. It wasn't just emotionally exhausting, it was psychologically corrosive. To maintain credibility, he sometimes had to encourage or discuss methods of exploitation, dancing at the edge of moral compromise. Every interaction chipped away at something inside him. He wasn't just monitoring evil, he was wearing its face. And yet, Daggio knew that this kind of infiltration was vanishingly rare in cybersecurity. Most threat intelligence comes after the fact. Post-breach analyses, digital forensics, malware reverse engineering. Very few defenders get to sit in the same room, even a virtual one, as the attackers while they plot in real time. It's the difference between reading a crime scene report and standing in the room with the killer before the act. The risk, the sacrifice, and the mental toll of such operations mean they are seldom attempted. Even fewer are sustained. That Daggio managed to stay embedded for months was nothing short of remarkable. His work became one of the most important data streams feeding law enforcement and cybersecurity teams as they built a case against LockBit. It wasn't just what he saw, it was how he saw it. Patterns, shifts in tactics, changes in language, internal politics among affiliates, all of it painted a picture far more detailed than any honeypot server or decryption tool ever could. Eventually, of course, the clock ran out. Whether due to growing suspicion, operational security concerns, or simply the risk of exposure becoming too great, Daggio's time inside LockBit ended. But by then he had helped crack the code of a group that had for years remained impenetrable. In the hidden war for the soul of the internet, where anonymous enemies waged silent sieges on hospitals, schools and businesses, John Daggio became an unlikely warrior. Not with guns or brute force, but with patience, subterfuge, and an unshakable commitment to truth. His story remains a testament to the bravery it takes to stare into the dark and choose to step inside. Few will ever know his full name, and fewer still will understand what it cost him. But in the world of cybersecurity, where most battles are fought behind closed firewalls and forgotten passwords, his work is a reminder, sometimes to beat the monster you have to sit at its table and take notes. LockBit was never just another ransomware gang. It didn't operate in the chaotic, scattered way many of its predecessors did, fueled by ego, greed and betrayal. It ran like a company. A streamlined, corporate-style enterprise designed for profit, efficiency and expansion. Where most cybercrime outfits stumbled over internal strife and poor organization, LockBit implemented structure, innovation and something previously unthinkable in criminal circles: customer service. At the heart of LockBit's strategy was a business model borrowed straight from Silicon Valley. Ransomware as a service, RaaS, wasn't a new concept when LockBit entered the scene, but they perfected it. Rather than handling every attack themselves, LockBit built tools, sophisticated ransomware payloads, dashboards, encryption platforms, and leased them out to affiliates. These affiliates were often other hackers or small criminal teams who lacked the technical prowess to build their own malware, but were more than capable of launching attacks. LockBit gave them the tools and the infrastructure and took a cut of the ransom payments in return. But what made LockBit stand out wasn't just the outsourcing, it was how they treated their affiliates. Unlike earlier groups which were often rife with distrust and double-crossing, LockBit worked hard to maintain the loyalty of its clients. They introduced a feedback loop. Affiliates could report bugs in the ransomware code, request features or suggest improvements. In return, LockBit would issue updates, sometimes within days, demonstrating a level of responsiveness on par with legitimate tech companies. This innovation extended into the very structure of their offerings. LockBit's developers rolled out updates with enhancements like faster encryption, customizable ransom notes, and tools to bypass endpoint detection. They offered affiliates options like data destruction timers, which would permanently delete stolen data if a ransom wasn't paid, self-destructing malware, and even cosmetic tweaks like changing the wallpaper on infected machines to display their branding or threats. They even ran what was effectively a bug bounty program, just like Apple, Microsoft, or Google. If you found a flaw in the ransomware builder, the control panel, or the leak site, you could report it anonymously and receive a reward. This wasn't a gang that viewed their affiliates as expendable. They saw them as partners, and in doing so they created a feedback ecosystem that made their software deadlier and more efficient with each iteration. LockBit also understood branding. Their ransom notes were polished, their leak sites were well maintained, and their messaging was consistent. They positioned themselves as professionals, criminals, yes, but not chaotic thugs. They wanted victims and affiliates alike to view them as inevitable, powerful and rational. If you paid the ransom, they would decrypt your data. If you didn't, they would leak it. No surprises, no random destruction, just business. This approach marked a clear departure from the earlier wave of ransomware gangs, where unpredictability and infighting were the norm. Groups like Rival and Conti had seen their empires crumble under the weight of internal greed and mistrust. In some cases, leaders siphoned off funds or betrayed affiliates. Others became targets of international law enforcement because of their high-profile attacks and erratic behavior. LockBit, by contrast, was careful. They rarely went after hospitals or critical infrastructure, at least not overtly, likely to avoid drawing too much heat. They maintained a professional tone in negotiations and cultivated the image of a group you could reason with if you had the money. Perhaps most chilling of all was how LockBit viewed growth and innovation. They weren't content to sit on a successful formula. They experimented with new ideas, like offering trial runs to potential affiliates, or adding features to ransomware that would monitor whether a victim was trying to restore data or contact law enforcement. They implemented user behavior analytics within infected systems to determine if a victim was likely to pay quickly or if pressure needed to be escalated. They introduced encryption algorithms that were harder to crack and worked faster, making their ransomware more effective and more profitable. All of this was done not with the mentality of a hacker tinkering in a basement, but with the mindset of a product manager running quarterly updates. LockBit even hosted competitions to recruit new talent. In 2022, they offered bounties for finding security vulnerabilities, developing 0 days, or even writing persuasive copy for ransom notes. Anything that could improve their operation. This level of sophistication stood in stark contrast to the amateur hour antics of earlier ransomware groups. While other gangs made headlines for their sloppy code or their impulsive demands, LockBit stayed disciplined, focused, and ruthlessly efficient. Their affiliates knew what they were getting: reliable tools, good support, and a share of profits. That made LockBit the go-to provider in the ransomware ecosystem. If you were serious about cybercrime, you used LockBit. And LockBit knew it. Their leadership, still anonymous, still shrouded in layers of encrypted communication and proxy servers, didn't act like a crime boss barking orders. They acted like CEOs, setting vision, managing risk, and expanding market share. Their forums were filled with internal memos, updates, and technical notes that would be right at home in a quarterly investor call if the investors were criminals. This cold professionalism made LockBit uniquely dangerous. They weren't driven by chaos. They weren't unstable. They weren't going to implode from within like so many others. They were building something scalable, sustainable, and far-reaching. And they did it by learning from the mistakes of others. Don't steal from affiliates, don't attract too much heat, don't overextend. They made ransomware into a service. They made cybercrime into a brand, and for a time it worked. LockBit didn't just survive. They thrived. Until finally someone figured out how to speak their language and dismantle the empire they'd built, one carefully placed line of code at a time. By the time LockBit 3.0 hit the dark web in mid-2022, it wasn't just a tool for hackers, it was a fully weaponized platform, refined by years of criminal innovation. It represented the apex of what ransomware as a service could become. Fast, efficient, easy to use, and devastatingly effective. It wasn't built just for elite cyber criminals. It was so intuitive and polished that it could, quite literally, be taught to children, and in some cases it was. LockBit's developers had been steadily iterating their ransomware since its first appearance. The early versions were already dangerous, boasting capabilities that allowed affiliates to launch attacks with minimal technical effort. But LockBit 3.0, sometimes referred to as LockBit Black, was something else entirely. It was a declaration of dominance. A signal that LockBit was no longer just a competitor in the ransomware market, it was the market leader, and everyone else was playing catch-up. Technically, LockBit 3.0 was miles ahead of its competition. It featured enhanced encryption algorithms that made recovery without a key virtually impossible. Files weren't just locked, they were encrypted in ways that defied brute-force decryption or reverse engineering. The malware also came with improved obfuscation techniques, allowing it to bypass antivirus programs and endpoint detection systems with ease. It would sit undetected, sometimes for days, before unleashing its full payload. The group also focused on speed. One of the key features of LockBit 3.0 was its ability to breach and encrypt entire networks in minutes. Speed was crucial. It limited a victim's chance to respond, to isolate infected systems, or to alert authorities. And LockBit had fine-tuned that process. Once inside a system, the malware would spread laterally across connected devices, encrypting as it went. It could detect high-value files, prioritize sensitive directories, and exfiltrate data before ever revealing itself. That last point was crucial. LockBit 3.0 was not just about locking files, it was about stealing them. Data exfiltration had become central to ransomware tactics by 20. Victims weren't just threatened with data loss, but with exposure. "Pay us," LockBit would say, "or your confidential data goes public." With LockBit 3.0, the group introduced fully automated data theft tools. The software would scan networks for documents, images, spreadsheets, legal files, anything that looked like leverage. It would bundle the files, encrypt them again, and send them to LockBit's servers for future blackmail or leak. But the real innovation, the thing that truly set LockBit 3.0 apart, was its usability. LockBit had always catered to affiliates, hackers, looking for turnkey solutions. But now, they made it almost idiot-proof. The setup was simple. The dashboard was slick. Launching an attack didn't require advanced knowledge of networking or security protocols. You didn't need to write scripts or troubleshoot malware. All the complexity had been abstracted away. A few clicks and you were in business. Cybersecurity analysts would later note that LockBit 3.0 lowered the barrier to entry for cybercrime so far that even teenagers, and in some documented cases actual children, were able to launch attacks. LockBit had, intentionally or not, gamified ransomware. They built a platform that did for cybercrime what drag-and-drop website builders did for web development. It was accessible, customizable, and dangerous in the wrong hands, which is exactly where it often ended up. This democratization of hacking supercharged LockBit's growth. By late 2022, LockBit was responsible for more ransomware attacks than any other known group. Governments, hospitals, law firms, multinational corporations. No sector was off limits. The FBI, Europol, and cybersecurity firms tracked a dramatic spike in LockBit-related incidents. They were attacking with a frequency and ferocity that outpaced even notorious predecessors like Revil and Conti. Part of this success was also LockBit's adaptability. They were constantly improving the product. Affiliates could suggest features, and within weeks those changes would appear in the next version. Want to customize the ransom note? Done. Need the malware to delete itself after payment? Added. Want it to spread via USB drives or through unsecured RDP ports? No problem. LockBit's developers didn't just listen, they delivered, and they did so quickly, building a kind of loyalty with their criminal user base that no law enforcement agency could easily disrupt. They also created redundancy. LockBit's infrastructure, from their leak sites to their command and control servers, was decentralized, duplicated across the dark web and bulletproof hosting providers. Even if a server was taken down, another would replace it almost instantly. This resilience made LockBit seem untouchable. They were everywhere and nowhere, a ghostly network of code and cache. And by dominating the marketplace both in terms of volume and sophistication, LockBit slowly squeezed out competitors. Other ransomware gangs either dissolved, were absorbed, or were left scrambling to differentiate themselves. Even established groups tried to mimic LockBit's structure and tactics, but none could match the polish or the pace. LockBit had reached a level of industrialization that others couldn't replicate. By 2022, cybersecurity firms and law enforcement agencies quietly acknowledged what was already obvious to those on the inside. LockBit wasn't just a ransomware gang. It was the ransomware gang, the apex predator in a dark ecosystem. And with each innovation, faster breaches, smarter automation, easier interfaces, it became harder to imagine how anyone could stop them. The group had made cybercrime not just scalable, but inevitable. They were no longer asking how to get in, they were asking how to dominate everything once they did. In early 2023, LockBit's stranglehold on the ransomware world began to falter, not because of an international sting operation or some groundbreaking defensive technology, but because of something far more mundane, a bug. Version 3.0, hailed as the pinnacle of ransomware sophistication, had a critical flaw buried deep in its code. At first, it wasn't public knowledge, but among LockBit's top affiliates, whispers began to circulate. Victims weren't always receiving decryptors after paying ransoms. Files were being permanently corrupted. For a platform that prided itself on its reliability, a perverse twist on traditional customer service, this was a crisis. The issue wasn't just damaging to LockBit's reputation, it was financially catastrophic. Affiliates were furious, payments were being withheld. Trust in the system that LockBit had so carefully engineered, the automation, the slick interfaces, the promises began to fracture. Behind the scenes, LockBit's leadership launched an internal audit. The group's enigmatic leader, who operated under the alias LockBit's, traced the bug to a chunk of recycled code buried in the encryption engine. That code had originally come from Black Matter, a defunct ransomware group born out of DarkSide, itself a rebranded crew known for the infamous Colonial Pipeline attack. In repurposing this code, the LockBit developer had introduced a vulnerability. A small one perhaps, but devastating in practice. This wasn't just about faulty software. LockBit's identity was built on a promise of professionalism. Unlike chaotic rivals who imploded over stolen payouts and botched encryptions, LockBit sold itself as a stable, efficient partner. Bugs weren't part of the deal. So when LockBit's discovered the error, he acted swiftly, but not diplomatically. Instead of quietly resolving the issue, he made an example of the developer. Publicly shaming them on dark web forums, LockBit's refused to pay the $50,000 bounty promised for bug reports. His reasoning: the developer caused the problem in the first place. The bounty, in his view, was void. It was a cold, calculating decision, one designed to reaffirm control and send a message. Mistakes wouldn't be tolerated. But the developer wasn't just another freelancer, he was integral to the success of LockBit 3.0, responsible for key components of the ransomware's code. Humiliated and infuriated, he retaliated in the most explosive way possible by leaking the entire LockBit 3.0 ransomware builder online. In cybercrime circles, this was an earthquake. The builder, the very software used to craft LockBit ransomware, was now freely available. It included everything: the encryption modules, the customization features, the ransom note generators, the infrastructure templates. Anyone with a computer and basic instructions could now build their own LockBit variant. No payment, no vetting, no allegiance to LockBit required. This wasn't just a betrayal, it was a detonation of LockBit's business model. Their competitive edge, the technology they had guarded so fiercely, was suddenly open source, and not by choice. Affiliates no longer needed LockBit's infrastructure or oversight. They could go rogue. Worse still, rivals and law enforcement alike now had access to the full architecture of the world's most dangerous ransomware. The response from the cybersecurity community was immediate. Analysts tore apart the leaked builder, mapping its behavior, its encryption patterns, and its command and control systems. It was a goldmine of intelligence, revealing how LockBit operated at a granular level. For incident response teams, it offered an unprecedented advantage. For LockBit's adversaries, it was a chance to finally go on the offensive. But there was another, more troubling side effect: proliferation. The leak triggered a wave of amateur ransomware deployments. Within weeks, dozens of new gangs popped up using tweaked versions of LockBit's code. Some operated under new names, others kept the LockBit branding. A few were sloppy, launching broken attacks that didn't even work, but many were effective, small-time players who now wielded one of the most dangerous tools ever built. The internet saw a spike in ransomware incidents. Attacks hit schools, hospitals, municipal governments, often by groups with no clear origin or affiliation. Law enforcement could no longer trace them to LockBit. The malware was too widely spread, too easily repackaged. Attribution became a guessing game. Meanwhile, LockBit's app scrambled to reassert control. He claimed the leak was staged, a honeypot designed to catch law enforcement. He posted new bounties, reassured affiliates, and announced plans for LockBit 4.0, but the damage was done. The illusion of order had shattered. The leak proved that LockBit was not invulnerable. It was subject to the same human flaws: ego, resentment, betrayal as any other organization. In the end, LockBit's greatest strength, its professionalization, became its Achilles heel. By building a system so efficient and centralized, they made themselves dependent on internal loyalty. When that loyalty broke, the entire enterprise cracked wide open. And in doing so, they accidentally armed the world. When the LockBit 3.0 ransomware builder was leaked online, it didn't just expose one of the most dangerous tools in cybercrime. It set off a chain reaction that flooded the internet with chaos. Almost overnight, copycat groups sprang to life. These weren't sophisticated hackers with years of experience. Some were small-time crooks, others were teenagers with a grudge. A few were just opportunists who had downloaded the builder and followed the steps like a recipe. The results were swift and dramatic. Ransomware attacks surged globally. Schools in rural districts, family-run clinics, local governments, all of them started reporting encryption attacks bearing the LockBit branding or its unmistakable digital fingerprint. Only now, it wasn't coming from a centralized command. It was everywhere, and it was coming from anyone. LockBit's leadership, particularly the mysterious figure known online as LockBit's up, hadn't prepared for this. Their brand had been weaponized by people they'd never met, with no quality control, no communication, no vetting. The once tightly managed affiliate network, where operators paid for access and followed a code of conduct, had become irrelevant. What had once been a boutique criminal enterprise now resembled a free-for-all. At first, LockBit's tried to frame the explosion as a kind of success. Imitation is the highest form of flattery, he suggested on forums. But behind the scenes, the consequences were mounting. LockBit's infrastructure, the dark web leak sites, the ransom negotiation portals, the data storage began to collapse under the weight of this new activity. The dark web servers hosted on anonymous Tor networks weren't designed to handle the sheer volume of data being uploaded. As new threat actors used the LockBit name to publish victim data and announce breaches, the servers slowed to a crawl. Victims, investigators, and even affiliates complained that leak sites were timing out, uploads were failing, and messages were disappearing. This wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a crisis of credibility. One of LockBit's core selling points had always been reliability. When a company was hit, they could expect a professional, even customer-friendly experience, a countdown clock, a functional payment portal, proof-of-life files. Now all of that was breaking down. Even real LockBit affiliates couldn't get their data posted in time. In some cases, victims were paying ransoms only to find the decryptor never arrived, or the data had already been leaked by someone else. The irony was brutal. LockBit had built tools for scale and automation. That's what made them so powerful and so attractive to affiliates. They could launch dozens of attacks at once, manage negotiations across time zones, and store terabytes of stolen data with minimal friction. But those very tools, when unleashed without control, became liabilities. Automation without oversight became chaos. Take their leak site, for example. Designed to pressure victims into paying by threatening public exposure, it relied on the steady, organized posting of stolen data. After the builder leak, hundreds of attackers, legitimate and fake, tried to post data under the LockBit name. Some were real, others were lying. A few even posted fake breach data, just to sow confusion or build reputation. The site became so bloated that it took hours to load, when it loaded at all. Storage also became a nightmare. LockBit's infrastructure wasn't built for infinite capacity. Hosting massive data dumps from dozens of new actors meant quickly running out of space.
Old leaks disappeared. Important files were corrupted.
Victims who needed proof their data had been deleted in exchange for ransom couldn't find it. Trust eroded. Meanwhile, law enforcement agencies around the world watched with interest. The confusion, the infighting, the infrastructure failures, they were all signs of a criminal empire buckling under its own weight, and they provided opportunities. Every time a fake affiliate bungled a ransomware operation, it gave police a trail to follow. Every time LockBit's servers crashed, investigators had a chance to identify host locations, gather metadata, and peel back layers of anonymity.
LockBit said he tried to regroup.
He posted bounties for information on the developer who leaked the builder. He mocked noobs for misusing his software. He promised a new version, LockBit 4.0, that would correct past mistakes and restore control. But in many ways, the damage was done. The floodgates had opened. What LockBit had created wasn't just software, it was a system, a method, a business framework. And once that system escaped its creator's hands, it could never be recontained. The organization that had prided itself on order and professionalism had accidentally democratized cybercrime. In trying to build the perfect machine, LockBit made itself obsolete. Its tools were now everywhere, and the chaos they unleashed couldn't be walked back. As LockBit's infrastructure crumbled under the weight of its own success and the consequences of the ransomware builder leak, the once feared and respected cybercrime syndicate found itself facing a new and unexpected threat: mutiny from within. Affiliates, the cybercriminals who paid for access to LockBit's tools and infrastructure, began to grow increasingly dissatisfied. Their grievances weren't subtle. Forums and private chat rooms buzzed with complaints. The software was glitching, the leak sites were down half the time, and customer support, such as it existed in the criminal underworld, was non-existent. Once known for its almost corporate-level organization, LockBit was now being accused of ghosting its own partners. For many affiliates, this wasn't just frustrating, it was financially devastating. Ransomware campaigns are high-risk, high-reward operations. If the malware failed to encrypt properly, if the payment portal was down, or if the stolen data couldn't be uploaded, affiliates lost both time and potential profit. And in a crowded underground market filled with alternatives, patience wore thin. Prominent affiliates began to publicly defect to rival ransomware as a service groups like Black Cat and Royal. These rival gangs, sensing blood in the water, made strategic moves to poach disillusioned LockBit operators by offering better terms, more reliable infrastructure, and promises of ongoing support. On encrypted forums, some affiliates even posted screenshots of their earnings from other groups, showing how much more stable and profitable their new allegiances had become. It was a stunning reversal for LockBit, which had once prided itself on professionalism and elite status in the ransomware world. Just a year earlier, joining LockBit had been seen as a badge of honor, an entry into the cybercriminal big leagues. Now it was increasingly viewed as a liability. The erosion of trust didn't stop with affiliates. Victims and intermediaries, such as negotiators who often worked on behalf of companies hit with ransomware, also began questioning LockBit's credibility. Payments were going unacknowledged, decryption keys were delayed or broken. Leak threats weren't always followed through, diminishing the gang's leverage. The brand, once terrifying in its efficiency, was losing its edge. In the criminal world, reputation is currency. Without trust, even among thieves, a syndicate can quickly lose its position. LockBit's, the gang's anonymous leader, tried to reassert control by promising a revamped version of the software, cracking down on rogue affiliates and accusing rivals of sabotage. But the damage was already done. LockBit had built an empire on order, automation, and ruthless effectiveness. But when that order collapsed, the very foundation of its dominance, trust in its brand, evaporated. The lesson was stark. Even in the shadows, reputation can be everything, and once lost, it's nearly impossible to get back. In the volatile world of cybercrime, dominance is fleeting. For years, LockBit ruled with unrivaled force, setting the standard for ransomware operations. But in early 2024, the underworld was rocked by an unexpected power shift, one that would signal the end of LockBit's supremacy and the beginning of a new reign. The name behind this seismic change, KLO, also known by the alias C0P. KLO wasn't entirely new to the scene, but their rise had been steady, calculated, and mostly under the radar. While LockBit basked in notoriety, KLO built in silence, refining its operations and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. That moment arrived with a single devastating cyber attack, one that doubled LockBit's victim count almost overnight. The attack was surgical in execution and massive in scale. While details about the specific target remain shielded within dark web whisper networks, analysts and law enforcement agencies quickly recognized the aftermath. Thousands of endpoints compromised, terabytes of sensitive data exfiltrated, and a string of corporate ransom payments that reportedly soared into the tens of millions. KLO had not just landed a punch, they'd broken the nose of the reigning champ. In underground forums, affiliates and hackers were buzzing. Screenshots of encrypted file systems and ransom notes circulated like trophies. Speculation ran wild over KLO's tactics. Many noted that their malware carried a new level of sophistication, incorporating learning algorithms to detect and adapt to victim cybersecurity environments in real time. Others pointed out KLO's operational discipline. They weren't spamming targets like LockBit had begun doing. They were choosing carefully, extorting heavily, and moving on cleanly. This one operation was more than just a statement. It was a coup. Within weeks, the data showed what the whispers had been suggesting. KLO had surpassed LockBit not just in scale, but in reputation. Affiliates, eager to be on the winning team, began flocking to KLO's infrastructure. They were drawn not just by profit potential, but by the sense that this was the new center of gravity in cybercrime. Meanwhile, LockBit was reeling. Their infrastructure had become brittle, their affiliates disloyal, and now their status as top predator had been publicly and decisively challenged. LockBit's, the syndicate's leader, posted defensive screeds in forums dismissing KLO's rise as temporary and accusing rivals of exaggeration, but few were convinced. The days of LockBit setting the tone were over. Now they were struggling to keep up. What made KLO's rise so remarkable wasn't just their technical capabilities, it was their timing. They had emerged just as LockBit's empire was beginning to fracture. The leaked builder code, the affiliate defections, the operational overload, all of it had softened LockBit's grip on the market. KLO didn't need to dismantle the giant, they only needed to push as it teetered. In the months that followed, law enforcement and cybersecurity analysts would name KLO as the most dangerous ransomware threat of the year. Their attacks were fewer but more strategic, more impactful. In contrast, LockBit's remaining operations felt increasingly desperate. Smaller targets, inconsistent payments, failed encryption attempts. The cybercrime hierarchy had shifted. KLO's supremacy was now undeniable, and LockBit, once the undisputed king of the ransomware world, had become a symbol of what happens when innovation stagnates and ego blinds leadership to change. In the shadows of the digital underworld, power belongs not to those who ruled yesterday, but to those who strike hardest today. And in 2024, that crown belonged to KLO. The takedown, the leaks, the defections, all signs point to a wounded giant. LockBit, once the most formidable cybercrime syndicate in the world, now stands at a crossroads. But as the dust begins to settle and newer threats like KLO take center stage, a lingering question remains: is this the end of LockBit, or merely a chapter in a much longer saga? There's no denying that LockBit has been badly hit, its reputation tarnished, its infrastructure strained, and its affiliates scattered. The collapse of their once robust ransomware as a service model has left gaping holes in their operations. But unlike the downfall of traditional gangs where ego, betrayal, or law enforcement ends the story, LockBit's demise is less definitive. That's because many of the group's current problems are at their core engineering issues. The leaked ransomware builder. Devastating, yes, but it also revealed LockBit's technical DNA. With time, they could develop new builds, harder to trace and easier to control. The dark web infrastructure failures. Inconvenient but solvable with better bandwidth and more distributed servers. Even the affiliate rebellion could be managed with redesigned trust mechanisms, new incentive models, and better communication channels. In the digital world, every broken system is just an unsolved problem waiting for a new version update. LockBit has already proven itself adaptable in the past. It pioneered ransomware automation, monetized support systems for hackers, and redefined the client-provider relationship in cybercrime. Reinvention is not new territory for them. What separates LockBit from many other collapsed syndicates is not just technical sophistication, but resilience, the ability to iterate, test, and deploy solutions in near real time. That resilience is exactly what makes predicting their fate so difficult. In a space as fast-moving and decentralized as cybercrime, extinction isn't inevitable. Evolution is. Criminal syndicates don't disappear. They fracture, rebrand, and return under different banners. Some of LockBit's former affiliates have already shown signs of forming smaller, leaner gangs. Others have switched to rival ecosystems, but the core of LockBit, its methodology, its code, its playbook remains a toolkit that any skilled actor can pick up and deploy. What this all points to is something larger than LockBit itself, the increasing industrialization of digital crime. The playbooks are systematized. The malware is modular. The infrastructure is scalable. Even the marketing mimics tech startups. This is no longer the realm of lone hackers. It's a business, one capable of adjusting to market forces just like any legitimate enterprise. Law enforcement may claim a victory in discrediting and destabilizing LockBit, but the war is far from over. In fact, it's entering a new phase, one where cybercrime operations behave more like corporations than criminal crews, where the failure of one version leads to the beta launch of another. And in that future, LockBit, or something born from it, may very well return. So is this the end? For now, perhaps, but history and the very nature of the internet suggests that in cybercrime few things truly die. They simply go offline, regroup, and log back in with a new name. When cybercrime begins to mimic corporate innovation, the line between illegality and enterprise blurs in unsettling ways. LockBit wasn't just a gang of hackers, it was an organization. It offered customer support, tracked performance metrics, rolled out feature updates, and even solicited feedback from its affiliates. The playbook wasn't stolen from traditional gangs, it was borrowed from Silicon Valley. This convergence poses a deep challenge. If criminal networks adopt the same lean, modular, agile approaches that startups use, then traditional law enforcement may find itself outpaced. Investigations take months or years, arrests cross international jurisdictions, but ransomware groups like software companies can pivot overnight. They're not slowed by bureaucracy or regulation. They test, adapt, and deploy at breakneck speed. Meanwhile, the tools they use, cloud hosting, encrypted messaging, AI-assisted automation, are the same ones powering legitimate industries. The overlap of criminal and commercial infrastructure makes targeting the bad actors even harder without collateral damage. In a sense, cybercrime doesn't sit outside the digital economy, it thrives within it. As agencies race to keep up, the question isn't just about catching individuals, it's about dismantling systems built to resist capture. Law enforcement must now think like product managers, network engineers, and startup disruptors. That requires a shift in mindset and funding, and a willingness to collaborate globally, constantly, and creatively. But even then, a sobering reality lingers. Can cybercrime ever be truly defeated? Or will it continue evolving, version after version, into something more advanced and elusive each time? As long as the internet enables anonymity and access, as long as financial incentives remain sky high, and as long as enforcement lags innovation, the answer may be the one no one wants to admit. Cybercrime doesn't die, it adapts, and in that adaptation we find our greatest threat, and perhaps our clearest reflection.